Hey everyone, today I'm going to be working on adding a new boss to my game Gunforged, which you can wishlist using the link in the description below. This is going to be somewhat of a deep dive. I'm actually going to go into a lot of technical detail in terms of how I add bosses. It's going to be a little bit abridged, so I'm going to be doing cuts throughout this video to get it to a nice size for YouTube, but I think that this deep dive is going to be very interesting for a lot of you, and I think it's going to show you what exactly goes on when I add new content to Gunforged. I got this idea to do this kind of deep dive video from DevDuck, who recently also did a deep dive video for his game Dolphin. So I would definitely recommend checking out his channel. He produces great content. And without further ado, let's get right into it. So the boss that I want to make is a skeletal worm or snake thing for my graveyard. This is one of the 3 arenas that the player is going to fight in. And I think it would be really cool to have a snake that kind of just snakes around the map and has multiple body segments and everything. So we're going to be doing a little bit of procedural animation as well. So I'm going to create just some very basic segments here. So I'm going to take these and get those in place. I need to create as the root node a character body 2D. And I'm going to call this skeleton snake. Okay, so I think the first thing to do is I need to get a pathfind component in here. So this pathfind component allows me to control the movement of any entity. I also have a velocity component that I can add here, which actually keeps track of the velocity of the entity. And so I'm using a composition-based design here. So if you look at my rat, for instance, you can see that I've got a bunch of different components. And all of these components provide some kind of minimal functionality for the game. So I've got velocity, which tracks the speed and allows me to do operations on that speed, like acceleration, deceleration, all that stuff. I've got an aim component, which allows entities with guns to aim at things. And the snake is going to need a lot of those things as well. So that's our visual. So we've got our head sprite. Now I'm going to actually create another node 2D. And I'm just going to call this body segments and put the head sprite under there. And then this body segments here, this is just going to be specific to this snake because I need to iterate over all the body segments and properly space them apart. And so that's what I'm going to actually do. So I'm going to add a sprite 2D here, or let's just call it body 1 sprite. And let's go ahead and drag that body over. And I'm just going to move this to a sensible position and also change the offset to my own preferred offset here. All right, so I've got all of my body sprites. And now what I need to do is I need to write code to make this work. So I'm writing Gunforged in C#, and I often get asked, why do I choose C#? And the reason I choose C# is because when I started Gunforged, it was Godot 3, and this was before GDScript had typing. And typing was very important to me for this project because there's a lot of complexity in the game in terms of everything that's going on. And so having a statically typed system is, I think, critical for me personally to be able to keep track of everything and to keep the project ordered and organized. And also, you know, with C#, you have the ability to utilize traditional software engineering patterns. So you can use abstract classes, which I am using quite a bit. You can use interfaces, which I am using as well. This video is sponsored by me. If you want to learn how to build a complete game in the Godot engine using either C# or GDScript, check out the links to my Udemy courses in the description below. I have a state machine that I use for all of these things. So private, it's called a delegate state machine. And this delegate state machine basically just holds references to functions and uses those functions as states. I need to get this moving. And the way that I get this moving is I can do var player is equal to this dot get player, like so. If player is equal to null, we're just going to do, and we need a reference to the velocity component here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Node private velocity component, velocity component. So just like that. And what I can do in here is I can do velocity component dot decelerate. So this velocity component, this actually doesn't move anything. It just tracks the vector2 of the velocity. But if the player is equal to null, we're going to go ahead and return. Otherwise, we're going to do a pathfind component now. So I need a reference to that pathfind component. And I can call in here pathfind component.setTargetPosition, player.globalPosition, like so. This will change according to how I want the boss to behave, but for now, we're just going to have it follow the player. And then I need to override the process method. because I need to call the state update. So I need to do state machine.update. And what that essentially does is that just calls the proper state function every frame. So this kind of is designed to be used in the process method or in the physics process method. You call state machine.update, and then I call velocity component.move this. So basically what I'm doing is I'm always moving the character based on the velocity, and I'm just manipulating the velocity with the pathfind component. So I've got my game. I can do spawn skeleton snake 1. And now my skeleton snake is following me. So when I initialize the body, what I want to do is do for var I equals 0, I is less than body segments dot get child count I plus plus. And we're going to do var sprite is equal to body segments dot get child as a sprite 2D. And we're going to pass in I. And then we're going to say sprite dot position plus equals vector2 dot right times I times body segment distance. All right, so we've got the body segments all stretched out. Now, obviously, they need to actually follow the snake head. And so I think the next thing that I want to do is I want to orient the snake head in the direction of the player. And this is actually going to be very tricky. So I'm actually going to call a new method, private void update body segments. And this is going to be called basically every frame. And so I'm just going to call it in the state normal for now. So update body segments. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the head segment. So I need to get a reference to that. And I'm just going to create a private sprite 2D here, head segment. And I'm just going to assign that down here. So I'm going to say if I is equal to 0, then I'm going to say head segment is equal to sprite. And then in update body segments, I'm going to say head segment dot rotation is equal to velocity component dot velocity dot angle. Okay, it is working, but it seems to be going in the wrong direction, and that's because I drew the head wrong here. So you should always draw your sprites such that they are facing to the right, and that just simplifies things greatly. All right, so we're getting to the point where we need to add more sophisticated movement here, especially getting that body to work. But I think the important thing to do is to iterate over all the body segments and make sure that their angles are being changed. Again, this is not going to be correct immediately, but I'm just taking baby steps. I'm gradually getting to the point where it's going to work the way that I want it to work. All right, so we've got the entire snake moving now, but obviously this is not very snake-like movement. There we go. So now we've got a much nicer looking snake that's following very well. But the nice thing is the body parts are not going to move because they're all using the velocity. They're not going to move when the snake is stopped. The worm is pretty big, but I want to add some more segments. So I'm going to do body 6 sprite, body 7 sprite. I might as well go all the way to 10. Okay, so after tweaking a lot of the code and doing a couple of experiments, I've settled on some good snake movement here. And basically the algorithm just ends up being all the snake pieces just follow the next piece ahead of them in accordance with the velocity of the overall snake. I've also added 10 body segments, so the snake is very long. And remember, this is going to be like a skeletal snake, and it's kind of more like a worm because it doesn't have sinusoidal movement. It doesn't do the S shape. So now that the basic movement is in place and the snake is moving, what I want to do now is I want to actually add some functionality to the boss. So I want the boss to be able to intelligently move around the level, but also be able to be hit. We're actually going to have to probably add a ton of hitbox components here. Let me go to my Rat King and I'm just going to see what we got going on. So I need the boss health bar registration component. So I'm going to instantiate that. And this tells the game that this is a boss. So boss health bar registration component. I do need a health component. And this health component, we're going to set the boss health to something like 2500. And this health component needs to be put into the boss registration component here. A hit flash group component. So this is going to be the one that's kind of iffy. So let's go ahead and do a hit flash group component. And we're going to put that as a parent of the body segments here. So that should work just fine. And we need a bunch of hurtbox components. So I'm going to put the hurtbox component as a child of each of these. Now let's just give it a radius of 12 for all these. And then I'm also going to assign the health component and the status receiver component here. And now hopefully I'll just be able to duplicate this a bunch of times. So you can see how it's very easy for me to connect up all the health and everything. And so now if I spawn this boss, I've got the boss health bar at the top, and then look, I've got all of the indicators here. and I can actually start doing damage to him. So everywhere on the worm can take damage. So the next step is let's go ahead and create some better visuals for this guy, make him look a little bit more impressive. So I think I'm going to stick with this color for the base bone color. However, this also needs to be made a little bit more, I don't know, I guess shapely would be the word. Yeah, I think that looks fine. Yeah, that looks great. So I like the shape of this actually. I think this turned out pretty good. I like these little extra shape features here. I might round that off a little bit, but yeah, this is looking great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add an outline actually first. So let me do that. Highlight all this and then do Shift O for the outline. And then there's a couple of things that I do here for the outline that I think are important. One, if you want to emphasize the sharpness of something, then you can, instead of just doing a single pixel here, you do a pixel like that. And you can see in the preview that just makes the fang look a little bit sharper. So here's the other thing about pixel art is that you'd be surprised how much a 1 pixel difference can make. So whether you're placing a pixel or moving something by a pixel, especially when you're dealing with smaller canvas sizes, I think you'd be really surprised at how much of a difference 1 pixel can make. So if you are finding that something that you're working on is looking a little bit weird, definitely try just moving something around by like a single pixel. And I think you'll find that that can actually make a huge difference. So what I've done now is I'm just going to go ahead and add some highlights here. Okay, now I'm going to be looking for a purple color to do sort of like the shadows down here. Now I don't really want to use a very dark purple color. Yeah, that looks so much better now. So do not be afraid of the incremental improvements. Now, one thing that I'm noticing is that the draw order of these things is wrong. The body 10 sprite needs to render before everything else. So I'm just going to reorient this. Let's now do the body segments here. I want to do something like a vertebrae. So let's go ahead and take a look at what a snake vertebrae looks like. Okay, so it's actually kind of like a rib cage. So let's go ahead and see if we can draw that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer and I'm just going to draw over it. So we'll kind of just make a spinal column here, I guess, kind of. Again, roughly matching the width that I've got here. So let's see if I can get away with just copying and pasting this thing. So again, the 1 pixel difference. Oh yeah, that looks good. Actually, I might even move this over one more. Perfect. Look at that. So just with a couple of movements, I've already created something that I think looks much nicer. I'm just going to go ahead and do this, export layers here. So that's going to overwrite the body, I think. Yeah, it has overwritten the body. So let's see what this looks like. I'm kind of curious. And look at that. So we're going to need to modify the flip, but now we've got a skeletal snake. Now I'll probably want a tail piece that is just kind of like smaller than everything. All right, I think that this is looking pretty decent actually. So let's go ahead and see how that looks in game. Nice, look at that. So we've got a skeletal snake boss. Now I really do want to add a tail piece. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that now. So I'm just going to do that very simply like this. And I'm going to also shrink this one by going up like so. So it kind of ends in a nice little end piece there. Drag this out a little bit with a kind of like a slow fade out here. Yeah, this might actually work just fine. All right, I think this is looking great, honestly. Now that we've got the skeleton snake moving around in a sort of test environment, we need to actually make him move around the graveyard arena because that's where he's going to be spawned. So let's go ahead and make him have a more interesting, let's say, movement pattern through the level. And then what we're going to do is add an attack for him. So what I'm going to have him do is sort of slither around all of the different places. Okay, so now we're going to set the target position. So I'm going to store that. So private vector2 target position. And let's create a new method called acquire target position. So I'm going to put that up here, private void acquire target position. And we're actually just going to go ahead and move this up here. And then we're going to say target position is equal to new vector2 random x random y. So there's our target position. So I like to test things very incrementally so that I know what the behavior is looking like as I build it. I don't like to go long periods of time without testing. That's just a personal preference. There's certainly nothing wrong if you do, but I want to just make sure that this is working correctly. So I'm just going to watch the snake a little bit. So I think what's happening is that that path is not optimal for the snake. It's too close to the terrain. So I might have to also modify that as well. We can't have the snake getting caught on edges. That would not be good. Okay, and now he's getting a bunch of new positions all in the same corner here. And I don't know why that's happening. It's probably got to be related to the graveyard arena and the navigation regions that I updated here. Oh, you know what? I think I know why this happened, because I discarded my changes for the graveyard arena, which means that the room size rect got changed. So I need to re-extend this to cover the entire room. This is why you got to be careful with discarding things. So it was working, it just was not configured correctly. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to implement an attack where he's going to stop and shake, and his whole body is going to shake independently, and that's going to cause a bunch of bone spikes to come out of the ground and deal damage. So I'm going to make that, and we're going to hopefully make it as efficiently and as quickly as possible. I'm going to add a child node random timer. And this is an add-on that I made that allows me to specify a random timer. So I'm going to specify a time of 2, or let's do 2.5 to 5 seconds, like so. And this random timer is going to be 1 shot. Let's go to the skeleton snake and let's grab a reference to that. So node. And what I want to do is, let's call this the bone spike timer. And so we'll do private timer bone spike timer. We'll say if bone spike timer is stopped. Then what we're going to do is we're going to change state into attack charging here. So let's create an attack state machine add states state attack. And we're probably going to need an enter state attack as well. So enter state attack. So private state attack. And in here, we're just going to call velocity component decelerate so that the snake comes to a stop, and then private void enter state attack. So in here, this is going to be a little bit interesting. And the reason why it's going to be a little bit interesting is because I want to shake all of the body parts, but the body parts have their positions being controlled by that update body positions. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create an array of tweens. And I'm going to call this body shake tweens. When I enter this state attack, I'm going to assign that body shake tweens equal to new tween. And then this is going to be the body segments array.length. Here, let's do a random range. So var time is equal to mathutil.rng.randf range. We'll do 0.2f to 0.25f. And this is going to create just a very subtle variation in all the body parts. So let's do time here. And there are all of our tweens. Okay, so there's our snake doing its attack. Now it looks awkward because I'm not flipping the sprites properly. So now we need it to, when it starts shaking, it needs to start spawning a bunch of bone spikes. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new scene, 2D scene, bone spike. And just for the ease of use, I'm going to go ahead and add a sprite 2D here. And I'm going to create a new placeholder texture, just so that I can see what's going on here. So I'm going to do 32, or let's do 16 and then 32 in the Y. That may actually not be big enough. I want to do something like 48. Yeah, that looks better. And what needs to happen when our bone spike is created is we need to add a script to this, public override void ready. And I'm going to call callable.from initialize.callDeferred. You could consider calling an initialize function in a deferred fashion. And the reason is because the ready method gets called as soon as the node gets added to the tree at runtime. And if you haven't updated the global position of that node yet, then things can get a little bit wonky. And instead of making your code sort of reliant on doing things in the correct order, setting the global position first before adding it to the tree, you could just call an initialize function in a deferred fashion. And what that will do is that will just guarantee that everything's been updated for the initial state that you can work with. So the reason I have this initialize being called deferred is because I'm using the global position to initialize this telegraph circle, which is essentially just the area on the ground that is red and blinking that tells the player, hey, there's going to be something dangerous that hits here. And then we can do tween.tween callback. Let's do callable.from queueFree. So that should free that. Now we need to get that being created by the skeletal snake. So let's go ahead and create add child node. I like to add resource preloaders. to store references to packed scenes that I want to store, or want to spawn rather. So I'm going to look for that bone spike scene and just drag that on over there. And let's create a couple of constants in here. Private const int min spikes equals 5. Private const int max spikes equals 10. So private int spikes to spawn, and then we'll set that spikes to spawn in the enter state attack. So spikes to spawn is equal to mathutil.rng.randirange min bone spikes max spikes. So that's going to be set there. If bone spike attack timer dot is stopped, then what we're going to do is we're going to create a bone spike. So var direction is equal to vector2.right. Actually, I have a mathutil. I can do rand direction like so. Private const int min spike radius. We'll do something like 64. Private const int max spike radius equals 256. So in here, in this direction, we'll do times mathutil.rng.randirange min spike radius max spike radius. Bone spike.global position is equal to target position. And that should be all that we need to do. Now we do need to say that the spikes to spawn needs to be subtracted. Now, of course, the bone spikes are appearing in places that they shouldn't. And that's going to be a whole different challenge, getting that to work the way that it should. Okay, let's do some art now for that bone spike. We're going to use the same color and everything here. And we're just going to bring this on up. I might give it a little bit more of an interesting shape, but that might actually be okay. It's a little bit lopsided, but I think that's fine. I might even make it more lopsided, as a matter of fact. And I can also go ahead and just give it an outline. And again, you want to make the outline spiky at the top, like so. So now we've got a proper bone spike in place. And so let's go ahead and see what that looks like when the snake uses it. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. Now I want to do one thing, which is that in this bone spike here, when we create this circle explosion, I also want to do game camera dot shake, and I'm going to do a 0.5 shake. That's going to give it a lot of impact, I think, because this is a bigger boss. Typically, I don't use camera shake for enemy attacks, but for big bosses, like a boss that's like 10 times the size of the player, I think that it's appropriate to use something that feels more impactful. Yeah, so now the spikes are shaking the camera a little bit. That gives it a lot more intensity. Okay, so obviously this boss is not finished. There's a lot of work to do. I need to prevent him from clumping up on himself by limiting the amount of rotation that he can do as he's changing direction. I also need to make sure that the bone spikes spawn within valid locations and not outside of the map. And he needs to flip his sprite art if he's moving to the left so he doesn't look like he's upside down. So obviously all of those things are going to be fixed for the full version of Gunforged, but I already have several hours of footage for this deep dive. And so leave a comment below. Would you like me to do another deep dive part 2 where I finish up this boss and tighten all the problems with him and also add more attacks? Or do you think you pretty much got the gist of it? So I hope this deep dive was entertaining and or useful to you. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to support my work, you can purchase one of my courses, you can wishlist my upcoming game Gunforged on Steam, and you can sign up for my email list at firebelly.com. The links for all of those things are in the description below.